often, I guess, or always promote movies, but Noah the movie is coming out. I'm actually looking forward to this movie a lot. I'm excited to go see it. I'm hoping to go see it. We'll see what happens, but I think that this particular movie has two main benefits. The first benefit you probably got a glimpse of, and that is that it really promises to provide a rich visualization of the events of the story that we find in the book of Genesis. There's just something about our imagination, individually, collectively, I think that sometimes does not grasp the magnitude of this story from what I've seen of the previews, and I've watched like every preview that I can find. This story captures the magnitude of the events in the story. And the second benefit, I think, of this movie is that it is going to promote some interest in the biblical story of Noah. They're running a caption on the bottom of the title screen that lets people know that if they want the actual story, it can be found in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, which, of course, they have to tell you because most people don't know that. And so I think that it may actually create some interest along the way. That being said, no, I don't actually think that Hollywood is going to get the story right. That's just I don't think they're going to get there, although there are some details that seem to be, like they might have gotten some of the things right. But do I anticipate they're going to get all of the story straight? The answer is no, and that's why I'm encouraging you to do two things. One, go see the movie, and then two, make sure you come here, and we'll get the story straight here, even as you see the magnitude of it there. And so for the next 4 weeks after today and 5 weeks total, we're going to talk about the Gospel according to Noah, which might seem like an odd title, and yet in the back of your program and the inside of your program as well, you'll see mentions of the fact that Jesus, Peter, others related the story of Noah to the truth of the gospel, and there is much that we can see there. The main intersection, if you will, is that the world in which Noah lived is very much like our own world in many very important ways. Now, sure, they didn't have cars and tablets and phones and accessories and computers and TVs and all of the distractions of life in the 21st century, but human nature itself has not dramatically changed, and many of the things that we see are true of Noah's world, we can look around our own world and see them to be equally true in our own time. And fortunately for us, we have in the Scriptures a lot of detail about the story of Noah, and so we're going to launch right into that today. In Genesis chapter 5 is where we're going to begin. Now, as we begin looking at the text of this, I'm going to bounce around a little bit. Our text this morning is Genesis 5, verse 28, through Genesis chapter 6, verse 12. I'm not going to read this straight through. You may want to do that at some point just for your own sanity. I'm going to bounce just a little bit here. But as we begin this story of Noah, the inescapable beginning point is the world in which Noah was born into. The world into which Noah was born was not a great world. And as we read through, you might see some snippets of our own culture. But the world in which Noah was born was not a great world. We don't want to spend a lot of time here. We could get really bogged down in the details of the next dozen or so verses. I don't want to get bogged down in the details of those verses, and yet these verses are what set up the entirety of the story, and so we can't miss them either. And so as we look at the background, this isn't the point, it's the background, the world into which Noah was born, we find first of all that it was physically a difficult world. And we begin in Genesis chapter 5 and verse 28 where we read, Lamech, who was Noah's father, lived 182 years and had a son. And he called his name Noah, saying, "This one will comfort us concerning our work and the toil of our hands, because the ground which the Lord has cursed." And so for whatever reason, and we can only guess at what the world was like prior to Noah's flood, for whatever reason, Lamech, his generation of people, thought that it was harder to make a living than it should have been. Sound familiar at all to you? That God had cursed the ground, and we see that from Genesis 3:17 or so, where God cursed the ground for Adam's sake, and so there definitely was that to contend with. I would not say that the earth has gotten better since that point. We could probably argue it's gotten worse. So I'm not sure, and we cannot scientifically know for certain what the world was like then. We know that it was different in many dramatic ways, but we don't know what it was like. We don't know why their thought was that it was harder to earn a living than it should have been. One possibility is as they left Eden and headed further and further east, they were also heading further from water, and then they would have had to irrigate and other things because it hadn't rained. You have mist, but mist doesn't always promote plant life the way you would like it for agriculture. So there's a lot of things that we could kind of work our way into to guess how it might have been or why it might have been. But ultimately, they lived in a world that they thought was harder to make a go of it than it should have been. And so it was a physically difficult world into which Noah was born. We find, too, that it was a morally difficult world into which Noah was born. And we find this as we continue reading Genesis chapter 6. And I'm going to read a couple things. We're not going to go into great detail here. Parents, don't freak out. And it came to pass, when man began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, that those were mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Now, these particular verses have had a lot of misunderstanding over the years. The primary misunderstanding, one of the major ways that people would misread these, is that somehow angels were having babies with women. You look at it, and I am glad that some of you went, who in the world thought of that? Because that tells me we have to spend less time here than I'd hoped. But that is what actually for centuries people thought that, and people would still to this day. You can Google this, and you will find no shortage of bloggers, wingnuts, and whack jobs who still believe that that's what that means. Now, to take that position is to overlook two very important points, and I will be brief. The first of those points is simply this: angels are a different species than human beings. They are created beings. They can manifest themselves in the form of humans, but they are in the form of, not in reality of. They are a different species than human beings. Secondly, as a species, they do not reproduce. God created a finite number of them, and that is exactly how many of them there are today. No more, no less. They are a finite number. Jesus said it this way, Matthew chapter 22, for in the resurrection they, Christians, neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels of God in heaven. The point being that we, when we get to heaven, won't be reproducing either. It doesn't mean we become angels. It just means we stop reproducing like angels who don't reproduce. So that is the viewpoint that some people take. They miss it. Fortunately for us, in the 4th century, there was a guy named Augustine, or Augustine, depending how you want to pronounce it, and he said that the daughters of the sons of God and the daughters of men really was a contrast between the godly line of Seth. If you bear remembrance for a few chapters back, you read through the genealogies, we find that Adam and Eve had Seth. This goes back to our last series, actually. We talked about this. And there was a godly line, and then there was the line coming from Cain, who had killed his brother Abel. Remember all these stories? And so there was a godly line coming from Seth and an ungodly line coming from Cain, and they began to intermarry. which is a far more reasonable way to view this particular thing, because people reproducing with people is something that still goes on. Fortunately, otherwise we would have died a long time ago. And so this is the more correct interpretation way to understand it. And it's supported by Jesus' own comments about this particular time. Jesus did comment about the time of Noah. He said this in Luke chapter 17. And as it was in the days of Noah, so it will also be in the days of the Son of Man. They ate, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark. And the flood came and destroyed them all. Even so will it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. I would think that if angels were having babies with people, Jesus would have thought that significant enough to include. Also, he said it's going to be that way at the end, and I don't see that happening today. Do you? Case closed, right? So, but what we do see is that it was a morally difficult time in which to be alive. You have godly men intermarrying with ungodly women. You have people basically just living their lives from a moral perspective however they chose to do it. They were going to marry who they wanted to marry, and tradition and mores aside, they were not going to take any of it. They were just going to do what they wanted to do. It was a morally difficult time. That doesn't sound at all familiar to our day, does it? Or does it? Beyond it being a physically difficult time and a morally difficult time, we find the world into which Noah was born was also a spiritually difficult time. If we were to continue reading in Genesis chapter 6, verse 5, the Lord saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Every thought they had was evil. Every intention they had was evil. This was a spiritually difficult and dark time. We continue in verse 11. The earth also was corrupt, or literally decaying, before God, and the earth was filled with violence. So God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. It was just a time that was absolutely destitute of anything redeeming morally, physically, spiritually. God looked at all of the earth, and every man that he had created, every man who was supposed to be the image of God, every man who bore the breath of God in his lungs, had perverted and corrupted their way to the place where it was spiritually dark and difficult. And so Noah's world was not a happy place. It was not an optimistic place. It was not a good place or time in which to have been born. It was a very difficult. But Noah came with a certain amount of promise. What we find as we read Genesis 5, 28 and 29 is that Noah's parents had great hope for him. Now, this should almost go without saying, right? Anybody ever have a baby going, wow, I hope he's a bum? Well, I hope he's a dropout. I hope he makes a complete mess of his life. Anybody ever go there when they're kids? Every baby that is born, the parents always have great hope. It seems like the beginning of life always brings the promise of good things. And it was so of Noah. But the promise that his parents kind of bestowed upon him was a little more prophetic than maybe many of the names and hopes that we have for our kids. And we already read the verses, but if we go back, they said, he shall be called Noah in verse 29, saying, this one will comfort us concerning our work and the toil of our hands. Now, Noah's name, the name Noah, literally means rest. And so you could name your kid Noah in hopes that he'd sleep all night. Wouldn't be a bad thing, right? That'd be a very prophetic way to go. His name literally means rest because they felt overworked and they were just really hoping that somehow Noah would bring about this idea of rest. But by comfort, they literally meant that they hoped he would turn things around. It's almost as though his parents would have been as ungodly as the rest of the world, at least by God's estimation. But there was some awareness on their part that things weren't as they should be, that life was just not meant to be lived this way. It should not be so difficult. And so as they named Noah, they named him Rest, but they also had hope that he would comfort them, that he would turn things around somehow, get things going in the direction they're supposed to be going. And like I said, it relates to our own world. How many times have you looked at the world around you and going, things should not be going this way? I don't know which way they should be going, but clearly this is not the direction that they should be going. I've yet to meet anybody who thinks that the world is generally heading in the right basic direction. Politically, spiritually, physically, any arena of life. We look at it and go, wow, everything just seems like it's like on its head from where it ought to be. And Noah's world was the same thing, and his parents were hopeful that he would somehow be able to bring about change, be able to turn things around and make it better. Not just for them, but for his day, his culture, his era. Now, as we think about what we have read so far, it probably does not surprise us what God might have thought of the world at this time. Anybody really putting on your seatbelt waiting for something unexpected after we've kind of broken down, at high level, the world in which Noah was born, we can kind of get a sense that he would not be happy, and that would be an accurate sense. He says it this way in Genesis chapter 6, beginning in verse 6. The Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping things and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. Interestingly enough, the word that's translated here, sorry, is the exact same Hebrew word that's translated about Noah, that he would provide comfort. It's the same word, comfort and sorry. The picture is this, that Noah's parents hoped that he would somehow turn things around, and God said, no, I'm going to turn things around. God was sorry that he had created mankind. The word literally means to repent, to change your mind, to change your direction. And God looked at all of humanity and said, I am sorry I ever embarked upon this project. I am repenting. I am changing my mind. I am changing my direction where it comes to mankind. And so while Noah's parents hoped he would turn it around, God was fixing to turn it around dramatically so, because he was about to destroy his creation. That's a pretty big turnaround, wouldn't you say? But, and I love buts when it comes to this, into the darkness of that moment, where God himself looks at earth and says, man, I wish I had never gone there. There is one ray of light. There is one ray of hope. And we find it in the very short sentence that makes up Genesis chapter 6 and verse 8. And this gets us closer to the point. But, change of direction. God is going to destroy the earth, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. There is hope in that verse. There is promise in that verse. It's short, it's sweet. We have nothing that we can't understand, and yet there is power there. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Now, the word found tells us that it was something that was lost. It was something that had been misplaced. I remember a couple years ago, I was out when it snows. I'm really hoping for not too much snow tonight and tomorrow. But one of the things that I get to do is I get to cruise around the whole property pushing a snowblower. Just one of the joys of being me. I'm thankful for it because the snowblower is a lot easier than a shovel. And so, I get the snowblower out of the shed, and then I blow the snow. I get a path going, by the doors. I get a path going. We have to maintain the sidewalk in front of our property, and so I try to get the sidewalk cleared off, and I come up the front walk, and I try to snow blow as much of the deck as I can. I don't go all the way up in the wood because I'm not sure about that, but the concrete definitely, because the more I snow blow, the less I have to shovel, which is the second step of that journey. And then because my wife likes to come over to the church without wading through knee-deep snow, I usually blaze a path through the grass over to the house. You can still see that. Actually, I do one in the front yard and one in the backyard because my children like variety and options, right? And plus they can take the trash to the dumpster, at least theoretically that way. Well, a couple of years ago, I was out doing all of this, and at some point over the course of the day, the keys fell out of my coat pocket. They were misplaced. Wouldn't have been such a big deal, except for, it's like my office key, the church keys, like everything. And so suddenly I had no keys, which, is kind of a problem when the pastor can't open the church building. We could have church in the parking lot in the wintertime, because I just snowblowed. Right? Wrong. And so I searched, and I searched, and I searched, and I searched, but when you're searching through knee-deep snow, can you find your keys? Yeah, I had to actually search through the building and find a duplicate of all the keys that were on my ring, because there was no finding them. I had a sense of where they might be, but then the snowplow came through, and I knew that I was just, wherever I thought they might have dropped after the plow hit them, anybody's guess. And now eventually, the snow melted, and along about mid-April, I found them because they were in the middle of a snowbank that I had to wait for it to melt about 5 feet down. But eventually, I found my keys. But I had to look for them. I had to find them because they were lost and they were misplaced. And we find here that Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Noah actually located something that had been lost or misplaced in his day, in his generation. This is not something that everybody had or anything that anybody knew where it was. It was just gone. But he found grace. What is grace? Grace is, the simplest definition we come up with is unmerited favor. Favor of God that you do not deserve and cannot earn. It's compassion from God. It's agreeableness with God. Which, when you're living in a day where everybody is wicked and the thoughts and the intents of their heart is wicked and their actions are wicked, to actually find agreeableness with God, to find compassion from God, is a big deal. It's a monumental find. It's a monumental discovery, and Noah found that. And he found that in the eyes of the Lord. When God viewed Noah, he saw something different in Noah than he saw in the rest of the world. God looked at Noah and God said, here is a man who is good. Here is a man with whom I can have a relationship. As God looked across the entire face of the earth, nobody else met that. Nobody else found that. As God looked at men, he didn't see people with whom he could have a relationship. Rather, he saw people who had over and over and over again earned his judgment. But when he came to Noah, he found a man on whom he could have compassion, with whom he could have a relationship. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. It's the great ray of hope and light in this story. But the question that emerges in my mind, and maybe in yours, hopefully in yours, if not, I'm going to try to put it there, is how did Noah accomplish that? How did Noah, born into a dark time, how did Noah, born into a difficult time, how did Noah, born into a time when men, if they remembered God, did not like him, and men who their intentions, their thoughts, and their actions were wicked and violent and evil and just literally turned the earth into this rotting corpse? How did Noah find grace in the eyes of the Lord in that place and in that time? And the reason that question is so important to me is because I look at Noah's day and I see our day. I read the news, I listen to the news, and it just sounds exactly what I read of Noah's day. And I want to be the kind of person who finds grace in the eyes of the Lord. I want to be attached to that ray of light and that ray of hope. I certainly don't want to be the one that God looks at me and goes, I just want to squish you like a bug. I am so sorry you even exist. This is not how I want God to view me. It's not how I want God to view you either. And so, how did Noah find grace in the eyes of the Lord becomes a very important question. And fortunately for us, God answered that question in verse 9. This is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God. And there it is. There's Noah's secret. You probably read right over it. A couple things. He was just. Noah was just. He literally was righteous according to God's law and loyal to God's person. He was just. Now, is that easy to do when everybody around you is wicked, when everybody around you is doing anything and everything and only what they want to do? Is it easy to stand up and say, I'm going to live my life according to God's law, and even though none of you even want to have a relationship with God, I'm going to be loyal to Him? Is it easy to be just? No, but God described Noah as a just man, right according to God's law, loyal to God's person. Secondly, he was perfect. Well, nobody's perfect, right? Well, some are less perfect than others. But the idea of perfect is to be completely blameless before God and earnest in relationship with God. You say, how can a person be completely blameless before God? God is holy. We've talked about that. We talked about that last week. God is holy. He's absolutely holy. And our lives are more sinful and more filthy than we even can comprehend. How can a person, any person, be blameless before God? Well, there was a man once who lived upon this earth about 33 years. And he actually never sinned. But then we decided we didn't like him, and we killed him. And God, in that moment, took all of the punishment for all of the sins, for all of mankind, for billions of people over thousands of years. And He placed them on that one man, and He judged that one man. That one man, you might be guessing already, is Jesus. But because of Jesus, when we accept the gift of salvation that God extends to us, when we say, God, you're right, I'm wrong, I'm sorry, please forgive me, and God says, I forgive you, that's a total forgive. And He forgives us for everything that we have done. He forgives us for everything that we will do. And He looks at us as though we are sinless, blameless before Him. Noah was perfect. He was blameless before God. You say, was Noah a Christian? Why, yes, he was. Because that's the only way to become blameless before God. Just as we look back for thousands of years upon the death of Jesus on the cross, Noah looked forward for thousands of years for the sacrifice that would one day come to save him. It's the same process. It's just past or future. Everything looking at the cross. Noah was blameless before God and earnest in his relationship with God. And then finally, Noah walked with God. He just spent his days in ongoing relationship with God. So how was it that God looked at Noah and saw a man with whom He could have a relationship and not toast? Because he was just, he was perfect, and he walked with God. How is it that we, in an evil day, in an evil generation, will find ourselves to be people with whom God wants to have a relationship other than and not turn into toast? By being just, by being perfect, and by walking with God. The same things that set Noah apart from his generation are the same things that will set us apart from our generation. The same things that brought hope in Noah's generation bring hope in our generation. The same things that gave Noah favor in God's eyes are the same things that are going to give us favor in God's eyes. And if you have to choose between God's favor and God's judgment, it's not much of a choice, is it? And so what we find is that God knows how to deliver a man from judgment. God knows how to deliver this man from judgment. And God knows how to reserve the rest of men for judgment. And the same is true in our own day. God knows how to deliver you from judgment, but he knows equally well how to deliver you for judgment. The point is just this: godly people find grace. Why does God not turn us into toast? Because godly people find grace. Why does God not destroy our entire planet? Because godly people find grace. Is our whole planet godly? Certainly no. But do we slow down judgment? Yeah, we'll get to that later. But godly people find grace. If you want to find grace, the answer is real easy. Be godly. Be right with God. Accept the sacrifice of Jesus so that you can be blameless before God. And then walk with God, daily ongoing relationship with him. It's easy. Or rather, it's simple. There are many who would think that's not so easy. Here's some practical application for us. You ever feel like you're alone in this world? I mean, not today. On Sunday, it's great. You know, we hang together. I mean, worship this morning was just crazy. I don't know about you, but I felt like, like captain of the football team ready to run through the banner just to get up here. I almost didn't wait for the trailer to end. I'm like, I gotta go. Love it. Love being here, love being in an encouraging, supporting environment. But you go out to work tomorrow, and people around you, and by Friday, after wear and tear, you begin to think, wow, it's like I'm the only one here. It's like nobody in the world around me even cares about God. Nobody in the world around me cares about right and wrong. Nobody around here cares about a relationship. And we can get to the point, and we do sometimes, where we feel like, I'm all alone. Like nobody else in the world gets it. Nobody else in the world cares. And in that moment, our temptation is to bow. In that moment, when the people around us make it look like they're living the party life and they're living the good life and they don't care about God and their life is fine, in that moment, the temptation for us is that we would say, you know what, this God thing isn't working. Your life is obviously better. I'm going to just do what you're doing. That's the temptation we face when we feel like we are all alone. The temptation is to join the other side, because at least then we wouldn't be all alone. In Noah, we actually find a guy who was all alone. We're not. I mean, on Sunday morning, we're reminded that. You look around the room, you're like, wow, there's at least 50 people on this planet that get it. There's at least this many people who share in our priorities, who share in a desire to live for God and to relate to God and to walk with God. We at least can have that camaraderie. There's a good reason to be in church, because by about week 2 of not being here, you begin to forget. And you begin to want to bow to the pressure of culture. But Noah really was all alone. And yet, he remained godly, and he found grace. It's more important to find grace than it is to find acceptance among people. And so in the moment of temptation, the question is, which would you rather have? The grace of God or the acceptance of people? But be cautioned that the acceptance of people generally comes at the expense of God's grace, which puts you under judgment, which is not really where you want to be. Is it? Another thing that we hear about Noah is that he was a preacher of righteousness. That as he built the ark, he preached to the people about their impending doom. How much would he have been able to preach if he decided to join them? The only way we're going to be able to carry out what God wants us to do is by staying unaccepted. It's just part of who we have to be, because the moment we go to the other side, the moment we cave into the pressure to be like everybody else, we're like everybody else. We have nothing left to give. We have nothing left to offer, do we? So let me encourage you. Godly people find grace. And there are few things in this world that we could even start to put in that same category of importance. Noah found grace. Father, we thank you for today. Lord, we look at the world around us, and there is no question that it is a dark, difficult, and wicked place. And we are tempted to join. Every day of our lives, we face an onslaught of temptation, external sources, and sometimes internal sources as well. As media and friends and family and life pull at us. Father, may we determine to find grace. Aware that it means we may never find acceptance, but also aware that it means that we will avoid judgment. And that we really do have something that the rest of the world needs that we want to share with them. So help us to remember that godly people find grace. Help us to find it. We pray in Jesus' good name.